we security people, I believe, strive to make objective decisions under really difficult situations.
The Adversarial Podcast. Why you gotta be so adversarial? Adversarial. It's time to get adversarial.
Welcome back to the Adversarial Podcast. It's great to see you guys as always. Welcome back. It's been a tumultuous few weeks since our last podcast, mainly driven by history. We'll remember these insane market swings with tariffs and whatnot. You guys seem to be holding up all right. Mario, how's your 401k?
I think I picked the wrong week to stop sniffing glue.
I love it. How about you, Sunil? You hanging on there?
Who was it? Daniel Kahneman said that looking at your stocks on a daily basis is hazardous to your wealth.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It was never more true than it is now, for sure. You know, some of the things, sometimes I think about that, when public equities are taking a beating, it's easy to think like, oh, it's a good time to be in private equities because then you don't find out about the impact for 7 months. But unfortunately, it's still coming. But speaking of private markets, Sunil, congratulations are in order. You made the Innovation Sandbox top 10 for RSA, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this in one of the prior conversations, but this year has a string attached, which is the $5 million safe that you have to accept. And I mean, it definitely, we talked about this months ago, but we had to really think about this and make sure that everyone was on board. It created an interesting new factor in even applying, right? And I do wonder if people chose not to apply. I know that there were some who chose, anyway, I have more details and it's public. But anyway, that's it. There's there are some startups that may actually, I would think, may have difficulty with their next round based on the amount that they can, the $5 million check. It is significant for some companies. And so, but anyway, bottom line is that we'll see how it turns out. And in terms of the longer term, we are going to have a deep discussion about whether or not it's appropriate for us. And we chose to move forward because we thought it was.
Hey, Sunil, remind me, because we did talk about this a while back, some episodes. Did you... Is it the top 10 finalists that have to
all
be?
10.
Okay, thanks.
Yes,
Thanks
all
for
10
clarifying
get it.
that.
Yeah, it's not just the winner. That all 10 get it, and it is a set amount at $5 million. Again, my suggestion is maybe make it more a range, like between 1 and 5, and let the founders choose what their amount should be. Because again, like I said, if with a $5 million save, the next round has to account for that large chunk, and depending upon where you are in the fundraising cycle, it could make a pretty significant difference.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a slightly different take on it, but first of all, congratulations to you and Gnostic. I think someone has a little bit of humility, saying like maybe the top dogs weren't in the race or whatever, but nah. I mean, if you gave everybody a choice between $1 million and $5 million, all of them would choose $5 million. I'm just saying because the terms are really good. So the way I look at this is, I remember as a CISO when I would hear about product and they would always, have press releases that said winner of the Malcolm Baldrige Award or whatever it was. I never understood what any of the awards meant. I just dismissed it all. I just figured every startup, their VC would craft an award for them. It's just like when you get those, congratulations, Mario, for being the top 100 CISOs. And like, oh my God, it's just someone's trolling LinkedIn. It's the who's who high school book. That's what I thought of all of the awards before now. And look, none of them had money, and this one does. So some people are kind of sour grapes about it, but to me, this one stands out. Like, I know people were gunning for this, and I know you had to be differentiated to win it. So kudos.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm curious. I know, Mario, I know this precedes your time there, but MBET was one of the top 10 last year. And again, this was before the change occurred. Do you have any perspectives yourself based on is there a sales? I don't know if you guys can talk about this publicly, but how did it help sales, and did it help fundraising? What was the general story?
I could not. It is definitely help. It helps a lot. The attention, Also, you do it in the right timing. I'm not saying this is what Emma did, but certainly, if you're raising money, it doesn't. If you're going for another round, it actually does help. But I poo-poo on this idea all the time. The idea that I have to take this $5 million. I mean, who pushes back on $5 million? But I just don't like that, right? I want to be given the opportunity. I like what you said, the range 1 to 5. But outside of that, in all sincerity, you do get a lot of press. You do get a lot of interest. You do get a lot of companies looking at you after that. Now, they have to be interested in that space. It's not magic, right? It's not like, but you do, and you did see a spike.
Yeah. And there were a couple other things I thought was interesting. One is just more Israeli companies, I think, overall, relative to prior years. I mean, a lot of these Israeli companies, including mine, I don't know if I would call ourselves an Israeli company, but we all incorporate in the U.S. So it looks like a U.S. company, but it's really, most of the work is being done in Israel, which is where I am, by the way, for those who are curious.
Oh, go bandwidth. Looks good.
So the
and sorry, when you said lots of Israeli companies, you meant in the Innovation Sandbox, in the top 10?
Yes,
is that what you mean? Okay.
Yes, yeah. And of course, well, not of course, but as expected, maybe, I think 4 of them were AI sort of companies. I mean, you can, depending upon how you look at them, maybe 4.5 or maybe as many as 5 or half of them. So it's an interesting makeup of companies in terms of the demographics as well as the topic area that they're trying to cover.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. Well, like I say, congrats. Looking forward to RSA. Best of luck with that. I mean, I feel like you guys kind of won already. That's another interesting angle this year. Is that it's less about the podium, if you will, and more about making the cut. So that's good. That'll add some excitement and something else to watch at RSA. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys out there. Next, getting back to the tumult and whatnot, we have a slew of topics that are kind of related to the administration. I was about to say the new administration changes, but at some point we got to just call it the administration here. One of the top stories that got a lot of press around here is this April 9th announcement, pretty much denigrating Chris Krebs, out of the White House and revoking his clearances and accusing him of all kinds of malfeasance. That's I think pretty strong charges coming out of the White House. And when I say charges, I mean just what it says on the paper. It's not legal charges. And that comes on the heels of some changes around NSA leadership. Timothy Haw, Cyber Command and NSA head, he was sacked just a few days before that. How do you guys feel about like the messaging this is given to leadership in the public sector around cybersecurity?
All right, so there are a couple things to I think we need to separate these out for one particular reason. One is with NSA director, effectively the new president has the opportunity to change out their leadership, the people that are working for them, right? Now, we have customs and traditions of which, this president doesn't quite adhere to any of those. So changing out the leadership is not something that's not terribly unheard of, right? What I think is really, but the other story I think is one that I think is a real bad concern. It's a real concern, which was not the revocation just of Chris Krebs' security clearance, but that of SentinelOne's. Okay, so SentinelOne has nothing to do with this, and yet they're extending the revocation of security clearances to anyone at SentinelOne. And that has, of course, that might have some business impact. I think SentinelOne said that it doesn't have much. But that said, it's again, it has that chilling effect of will you hire people who've upset Trump in some way. And there's so much doublespeak with this administration, where they say, hey, we don't want to weaponize government, but that's exactly what's happening here. They say, hey, and the reason why they revoked Krebs' security clearance is because he's being accused of suppressing conservative viewpoints. Last I checked, Krebs is a Republican. So he's being accused of suppressing conservative viewpoints as a Republican. So I don't know about you, but that doesn't quite make sense to me, right? but here's the thing that I think is really this is what really bothers me across all. And beyond that, that's also it bothers me. But the thing that really actually bothers me even more is that Reuters just had this other article about just asking for comment. Okay, and I think there was only one organization that came out and said, yeah, we think this is dumb, right? And it was Michael Daniels' Cyber Threat Alliance. And Michael Daniels was under the Obama administration, though, so people know where exactly he stands. But there were organizations that were affiliated, or that Chris was affiliated with, that basically said no comment. Really? I mean, come on, guys. We should have a comment on this. This is something that we should say. Look, I mean, I can understand Krebs getting his security clearance revoked. Again, that's kind of at the discretion of any administration, but extending that to the entire company is what I think bothers me quite a bit.
Well, I don't know. I'll say that, like, when to preface there that you can understand Krebs getting his pulled. I mean, to me, that's maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but it's like saying I can understand the kind of knee-jerk retaliation and targeting of one person, but it's still knee-jerk retaliation and targeting.
Absolutely.
And when you look at the way this thing was written, it was basically it's a press release, but when it's called a fact sheet at whitehouse.gov, you kind of wish that could be binding, and it should be anything that comes out of there, and instead it's just dragging this guy through the mud. It's basically it would be, if that were accepted as fact, then it would be hard to get him off of a treason charge. Right. I mean, no one's used that word, and I don't think that anyone should use that word. But it's hard to recoil at that and say that's just ridiculous, and then accept as fact all the saying that he was, personally trying to subvert and invade and needs to have his security clearances revoked. That pattern is concerning. And to your point, when you talked about chilling effect, the silence, the crickets in the request for comments show that the damage is done. And no one's coming to his defense for sure.
Yeah, and that's. So I hope that this is something that, again, we as a community need to make sure that is clear. Look, we all stand together, or we all stand alone. Okay, and when we have there's a pattern that we see. I mentioned doublespeak earlier with George Orwell. And in Animal Farm, they talk about war through peace and freedom is slavery, and we reverse the truth. Or in Animal Farm, the leaders reversed the truth, and when you're in these repressive governments or repressive leadership, that's what typically happens. They reverse the truth. And so I would say, look at what these quote facts are. Is that truly true? And if you find that they're reversed, then that kind of tells you something about the people who are saying those statements as well.
A couple of editorial facts. One, we should make it abundantly clear that this is not Brian Krebs. Poor Brian Krebs. That probably, actually, this is the first time it's poor Brian Krebs. I think for years now it's been poor Chris Krebs with all the targeting at Brian. But not the journalist, but Chris Krebs. And I don't recall if I had met Chris Krebs. I certainly hadn't worked with him directly. But I know that I did pay attention to generally the private sector feedback on any of those individuals as they came in, right? Because, regardless of the administration, whoever is representing, especially when it comes to public-private sector outreach in the government, is important to us. And I do recall that there was universal applauding of Chris Krebs. People like Chris. They find that he's extremely effective and was extremely effective in his role, and people are generally thumbs up on him in our industry. So I could be wrong on that, but I would think that anybody who's crapping on him now is doing an about face. Like, there's no one that's like, yeah, finally. I've been telling you the whole time. I haven't heard anybody except for the fact sheet that's saying anything negative about this guy. So it is concerning.
I think I think we're all leaning in. So I don't personally know Chris Krebs. I don't necessarily share some of his points of views politically, right? Just from a political perspective. What he did in his role previously, he was an objective based on what we've seen, he was looked at the data, looked at the evidence, and he was objective. And that's what security people are supposed to do. You look at the data, you see what's in front of you, and you don't play favorites, especially when you're representing the US of A. And so I hope people stand up to support Chris and the company he works with. And if you are afraid of retaliation by any person in power in the government, this is the time to stand up and support those people, okay? Because security, we don't survive. I'm always been a firm believer that, here you go, I'm getting my soapbox, but you look at the data, we live with the data, and sometimes we say we don't have enough data, so we make educated guesses, but we security people, I believe, strive to make objective decisions under really difficult situations. And what Chris has done before, Chris Krebs has done before, he's an honorable person based on what he did. I do not know what he's done outside of what he did in the White House, but what he did was very honorable, and we should applaud him.
This is my point. I think he's done a lot of things outside the White House. He used to be the vice chair of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. No comments, no email returns. He's on like a number of different advisory boards and different company advisory boards. No comment. Like, guys, you should have a comment, right? I think that's something you need to speak out and say, hey. Krebs is a asset to the country, not a liability. Correct. And
yeah.
Just full disclosure, I do know Chris. So, but I think this applies to anybody who's served our country honorably.
Yeah, no, fair enough. In other, not that we're trying to have a segment here on political news here, but. I thought something that was pretty interesting with the cyber angle on it. So that the signal leak that we heard about a lot and we talked about in our last episode, one thing that came out of that since we last recorded was that apparently the way that journalist Jeff Goldberg got added to that signal chat was that I think it was Mike Waltz who had gotten forwarded an email from someone.
Brian Hughes.
And it was a thread that had Jeffrey's phone number at the bottom. And his phone prompted him, hey, do you want to save this person's phone number? And it associated the person who forwarded the email with the phone number belonging to someone later down the chain. And that might have been a mistake. The reason I said it might have been a mistake, and then it was saved as that. But might have been a mistake, meaning I'm not taking it at face value that that's what iOS did. I'd want to get in a lab and reproduce this 10 times to see if it really happens. But I think either that happened or he saved it himself and made a mistake, but who cares? But to me, the cyber topic there is around UX and around how confusing things can be these days, right? Working with these tools and the implications that they can have. Is the lesson here that that's why cleared environments are so rigid and there's no, you're not supposed to let people make mistakes, right? You're not supposed to let people use things that involve human discretion.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, let's just be clear. I think everyone agrees. Having classified chats on Signal, let's just make it very clear that was we're not debating that part. We all believe that that's the stupidest thing to do, or shouldn't have happened in that way. So, so in the context of the experience, my joke here is going to be that AI will fix that, but it's actually AI that caused the problem to begin with. If you think about it, it's AI that says, oh, you probably should add this link. Contact information that was forwarded by Brian. Mm-hmm. It was Brian Hughes, I think, that forwarded it because he was coordinating an interview, and our smart phone says, "Oh, hey, you should add this contact." Right? That was the issue. But it was arguably you could. It's an assistant that's trying to help you, but maybe not as sophisticated to realize, hey, you shouldn't treat this as the person's signature line. So I would just as well say this is partly a problem of UX, but partly a problem of what could possibly go wrong when we let these AI agents do this, run amok at scale across our entire ecosystem. That was this is just a taste of what's to come.
Wait a minute, but that would wait. I'm going to poke something on here on the AI angle. You could be having separate conversations with other folks, but the AI agent should be smart enough to say, the topic that you are having with that other person, that AI suggests that you should add them to this other conversation. The AI agent shouldn't be that dumb to simply say, well, you have been chatting with this individual. Why don't you add him here? To me, it would sound more like, and keep me honest, Neil, the topics are also important. What topics you're having with that individual, which either the AI agent's dumb or our friend here was having conversations with Goldberg that were similar topics.
No, that wasn't the case in this case.
Yeah, so clear for me, Sunil.
Yeah. So what was happening was Goldberg wanted to have an interview with Waltz, but Brian was his intermediary, and Brian Hughes forwarded the information to Waltz saying, hey, do you want to take this interview? The interview actually never happened, but somewhere along the way, Waltz added Brian's contact information, and instead of, or rather, the belief is that iOS suggested that you add this contact information to Brian's contact information, and Mike Waltz did, not realizing that iOS didn't quite have the right alignment of the message that was being sent and the context behind it, which is, here's a reporter's contact information, not my contact information. Okay, so it treated the forwarded information as a signature line, which includes one's contact info. And I'm sure you've seen this. It shows up on mail, where you go in and you can say, hey, I think I know this person's contact information. Do you want me to populate the rest of it, right? It's meant to help. And for 99.99% of the cases, it's great.
Well, I'll throw in here in defense of the great machine. I would say, you're right, 99, let's just say 98% of the time it's right, it's suggesting it. I would say if you had some humans doing all that, they'd be at about 63%. They would make this mistake all day. Humans suck at this kind of stuff, so let's not pretend that the AI is making some crazy dumb error. You just have an admin rip through emails as fast as they can and associate phone numbers with people. Yeah, this long thread and one of the other people's phone number gets on there, sure. 30% of the time, maybe 40.
Well, at some level, there's some degree of accountability. Who do you blame in this case as well? But that said, I think in the context of is an AI system better in this particular example, if one looked at it, they did look at it and they realized, oh wait, this is how it happened. Let's say instead it was on Brian's actual signature line. Okay, and for whatever reason he changed phone numbers, and for whatever reason Goldberg ended up getting that new phone number. Okay, that's entirely possible. But I think most people would see that this message is about setting up a interview with a journalist, and say, wait, I shouldn't take this content and apply it to that person's contact information. I think I guess in this particular situation where with the proper context. I wouldn't say that humans would fail at the frequency that you were suggesting.
No, I don't see. I'm gonna disagree with you. I'm gonna be adversarial. I'm gonna go with. I think Jerry's right. My experience has been that the human beings, I've seen so many human errors, man, where they're sending email clearly of information from one customer and being sent out to the wrong. They don't even have the right name. It's not even the right name. And let's say it's a salesperson who owns both accounts. So this person knows, each of these, at least you hope they know these accounts or this, right? But I've seen it multiple times. The human beings will add the wrong customer to the wrong data by mistake. And even though they knew, you think the salesperson, these are your top 2 accounts or 3 top accounts, and you've sent the wrong information to the wrong customer. It happens. Spied. I've seen it happen all of the time, Jerry and Sunil. All of the time.
I agree. I agree with that particular scenario. I'm talking about, in this case, adding a phone number. So it's just, not that we all have any stats to work on here, but how often do people mistake a forwarded email with here's a contact information for this person, and say, oh, let me assign it to the person that forwarded the email, right?
So,
I think most of us would be like, that won't compute.
Yeah, I'll just bring it back to our friend Chris Krebs just now, right? So this is the same organization that's making these mistakes. The administration is making these huge mistakes. You should not be sharing that kind of national information with people like that. And then at the same time, they're blasting somebody for doing their duty. Come on, folks, really?
Well, the irony, again, the doublespeak is in the fact sheet. It was that Krebs, what did they do? He basically abused his authority by sharing potentially classified information with those who he's being accused of having unauthorized dissemination of classified information. And like, okay.
Isn't there locker up was the whole point with the servers that
those
were,
emails, yeah.
That's right, the emails, and there he goes. He's actually said real national information that would put people in danger.
We can get
anyway,
too political here, but anyway, the point is ultimately, is there a UX? One is, where will AI help, and where can it potentially create unexpected harms? And then two, is there anything from a UX standpoint that will help us see when AI is making a mistake? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I still say, I mean, I can't wait to stop beating the dead horse on this thing, but to me, this is the self-driving cars all over again, right? I mean, this is a self-driving car hit a person, and everybody's saying like, oh shit, we can't have self-driving cars, and I'm saying the person hits the person 10 times as frequently. but there's going to be a lot of focus on any little gaffe, any little mistake. Changing topics a little bit, to talk about background checks for a little bit here. So, Mario, you were speaking to a bunch of CISOs you mentioned, and a very hot topic lately was a DOGE staffer who seems to have slipped through the cracks and had access it shouldn't have. Is that right? What's going on here?
A 19-year-old got access to access some of this information that he should have not have had. And he had some potential connections to cybercrime.
Yeah.
Existing.
And this was Edward Korosteen, was his name. And the article on this at Reuters said that, and I'm quoting, the best known member of the DOGE service team of technologists. And you know what, and that he was once provided support to a cybercrime gang. However, you can interpret that however you want. This comes up to me like it's really close to home because of background checks and insider threat and that sort of thing. So, do you think that the normal background checks that are run in enterprise, environments would have caught this type of thing?
Well, I don't know if you saw the other article, but there was another article that came out about just the fact that a lot of us are still hiring North Korean workers, and so. I would say, to your question, if we're continuing to hire North Korean workers, then we failed at having the right kind of background check that would spot those.
I don't know. I mean, what is the purpose of the background check? It's to take the person the identity that you believe in, and then see what's affiliated with the background of that identity. And the North Korean workers are coming in through fake identities, so they're not like saying. They're not giving their actual identity in North Korea, and the background check's like, hey, this guy's in North Korea. So I don't think the background check ever had a chance for that. That was more about, is the person that actually starts here this person that you interviewed and that you gave the job to and that you think and it matched the identity, right?
Well, so there is a question of, is our background check then sufficiently robust to counter this particular threat? I mean, keep in mind,
right.
A background check is to address the potential vulnerabilities of a user or a person in the organization. And if we're finding that our user-centric vulnerability scan, i.e. a background check, isn't sufficiently robust to find all potential vulnerabilities, then we should need to expand the background check accordingly. And it doesn't seem like we're catching up to the times, right? So some new CVE comes out for Windows. If your vulnerability scanning provider isn't adding that new CVE as part of their vulnerability scans, then what are they doing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm coming clean here. The only reason we run background checks is because our customers required it. Okay, let's just be one. And some customers even, and I always push back on this. And I'm going to say I'm from Bay Area. I grew up in San Francisco, right? So I push back on the whole drug testing. That was a part of your background. Some clients even wanted drug testing.
Sure.
Which have we ever found any evidence that suggests these background checks actually help?
So let me go back to...
That's what I want to know. Yeah.
Yeah, let me go back to the analogy of the vulnerability scan. So again, I think a background check is a user-centric vulnerability scan. Okay, so now you have a vulnerability scanner for Windows, for applications, whatever. And this vulnerability scanner spews out a whole bunch of lows and mediums and maybe informationals. Actually, not even mediums, lows and informational type of findings. We're going to be like, you know what, that's nice to know, but we're not going to really care about those. It's just nice, we'll worry about those later. But if there are some, medium, severe, high severity ones, then you're going to pay attention to those. Okay, so now the question that you're asking is, well, what is it that we're scanning for in a traditional background check? And we ask, have you ever declared a bankruptcy? Okay, well, in some national security environments, that's kind of important for us to know, because that means you might be influenced by, someone trying to bribe you for disclosing sensitive, classified information. I would say a check on your bankruptcy, any past bankruptcy would be like a medium, maybe a high. Okay, maybe more like a medium. A drug test, though, I would say that's now more informational and low, right? And I think that's kind of the way I would look at it. We're scanning for these low and informational things in a background check, and not really scanning for those things that are high and critical. And we need to do that because we're seeing that we're hiring North Korean workers, and the background checks aren't serving as well.
I'm going to push back on that. So sorry, Jerry. Sunil, today you and I are in the opposite sides of these things, right? Some of the most maybe there are a bunch of cases, spy cases, where data and information from the United States was exposed and we don't know about. Okay, let's get that out of the way because we don't know what we don't know, right? But let's just talk about the public ones. And if you look at the public ones, if I look at the public spy issues that have occurred, those guys pass with flying colors. Huh?
You mean like with Deal and Ripley?
Yeah, I wanted to bring that one up.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're saying the people who worked for Deal or Ripley, I'm sorry, was the other one. He probably passed his background check, right?
Snowden? Did Snowden not pass his background check as a contract? Did he not? Remind me. Somebody remind me of that.
Oh, he did, yes. He worked for Booz Allen. I did go through a pretty rigorous background check.
Yeah. So, my point is, it's to me, even when we think about that, where's the data that shows? You know what? It feels like, you mentioned Daniel Kahneman before, and I'm thinking that this is just heuristic. It feels right, but there's no data backing it. And I'm open to it. So please, please.
I dug into this a little bit when I had to run background checks too. And what I found was kind of the gold standard, I guess, was really the FBI criminal database. And by gold standards, I should not say the gold standard. I should say the iron standard. It was what everybody did all the time, and it passed third-party review and whatnot. But basically, that was saying, were you convicted of a crime, at a national level or not? And I think the background of that was, did you rob a bank and shoot your way out and serve your time, and now you're out, and now this new bank you're going to work there, and they do a background check. Aha, got you. I'm not going to let you come in here because I know you secretly want to rob the bank. And that's kind of the underpinning of the background check and what they're trying to do. Or maybe it could be like same thing again, but domestic violence, and you've had issues, and now you're working in an area where you're exposed to the customers in public, and people are worried about what's going to happen, and especially in like retail or something where you might be tested, and so they're trying to figure you out there. Those are not vulnerabilities. Like to Sunil's point, it's a very different thing to figure out if you're going to be easy to coerce as an insider threat. Now the guy at Deal, and I'm talking about the one that was the plant, right? The one who's kind of the crying guy holding the phone, screaming in the bathroom. That guy, who's not the ultimate criminal here, right? He might even have some kind of amnesty or something by the time this is all said and done. But I do think the lesson for background checks is that Rippling, could they have figured out that this guy would have answered the call from Deal and been willing to do all this for $5,000 a month? Because that's what this guy did. And yeah, that I don't know his background yet, but if he was in a lot of debt, he had a gambling problem, that sort of thing, that's supposed to, the idea is that would correlate with this, and you'd be like, oh, okay, this person's more likely to be on the take, and that's a lot different. I saw, and so the credit checks are an optional thing. They're separate from criminal. Criminal's what everybody's doing all the time. The credit checks are a little bit different, and maybe they're more important if you have exposure to money, and you might steal it. But then the last bit of it is there was a startup that was changing the game a little bit on background checks. So instead of doing this once a year, get a fingerprint and go against the crime database, they were doing continuous checks based on social media. And they were mining the data, and they were looking it up just by email address and names. What could happen there without a unique identifier. But, they had a degree of, if it was John Smith, they automatically said, okay, let's not trust this data. If it's Jerry Perlow, they're like, yeah, it's probably him. And they would look at Facebook, and they would look at, I don't know if Mastodon was around then or whatever. And what they were looking for, I actually know this because we tried them out and we used them for a while, and we got a few hits. And it was weapons and glorifying violence, right? And, that was a positive thing. Like, hey, maybe this person's pretty dangerous in the workplace. Does that mean those people are more likely to spread ransomware or something? No. So there's different use cases in all this stuff. Yeah. But in general, it's a pretty antiquated control.
Yeah, so let me, I want to relate it back to vulnerability scanning, because everything that you just mentioned fits in that same narrative as well. So is a server externally facing or internally facing? That same question then changes how we look at a particular vulnerability or exposure or a finding. Okay, in this case, what a background check discovers is a set of findings. Well, if this guy has been abusive to whatever, then you may want to, and that person's externally facing, you may want to say, oh, that's not exactly what we want for an externally facing resource, right? So this, and then you also mentioned, we don't run a vulnerability scan once a year or once every 5 years and be done with it. We run it continuously. Mm-hmm. So this notion of a background check, a continuous scan that we do today, the best we do is actually a phishing simulation. And it's not even daily, but a phishing simulation is a measurement of a user's propensity to click on a phishing email. And we all have our own opinions of whether those are effective or not. But that's it. It's this notion of a continuous scan. But we typically don't do a continuous scan for users or for employees. And so anyway, my point is simply there is a lot of parallels to how we look at vulnerability scanning and background checks. And I would love to get to a point where we can do something like that for employees, but it gets really, really creepy very fast. And I think that there's a balance that we have to strike, because we don't want Big Brother inside of a corporate organization either.
What I'm gonna use instead of the vulnerability example, which I think is really useful. Thank you for using that, Sunil. I'm going to bring our cousin, the compliance folks, and think of SIG-Lite, right? Like you have to go and complete all these things where what would happen is, yes, the company is asking you to complete these forms, might include things that are physical security, even though you don't have anything on-prem or you're entirely cloud. But there, and I know you can say it's not applicable, I get it. But there's, what they're looking at is saying, this client of mine will say, I looked at my risk and these are the questions I want to ask, including background checks because of the type of data I have. But the vendor doesn't have anything to do with that. They don't have any, I'm not even talking about an HVAC vendor where actually install things and software and it potentially could become a conduit to get into your company. But they're dumb tools, is my opinion. If it doesn't apply to what the vendor is doing for you, then those tools are just wasteful. Yeah. That's my issue with them, Sunil and Jerry.
Yeah. I mean, there was a big matriculation towards risk-based everything, and I think that was really healthy. And in this case, I think the next level is threat-based. And figuring out what you need to be worried about and just focusing there. All right. So some back on national security. There was an interesting kind of watershed moment in the tete-a-tete Chinese-U.S. hacking, in that supposedly in a secret, but widely attended meeting, China acknowledged a role in some implicit way in the infrastructure hacks, Volt Typhoon campaigns that they were accused of. And that was a watershed moment and thought to be intentional, to say, yeah, that's us. We do have a toehold in critical infrastructure as a warning, right? In particular, over Taiwan. That's a pretty interesting change in things. It doesn't change any of the facts on the ground, but it does change the fact that there's some saber rattling going on here. Do you think that what's the trajectory that we're on with regard to China over Taiwan in particular? And does this change anything?
Yeah, so this is we're getting into somewhat interesting territory, one that actually has been forecast for some time in terms of the escalation of cyber. I was going to say weapons, but I'm hesitating on some of these words because there's a whole bunch of behind-the-scenes policy dialogue on what's the right wording for some of these things. Because if I put something in for the purposes of espionage, but then one can easily flip the switch and use it to disrupt infrastructure, disrupt things. Is it for espionage or is it for war? Right? It is a very fine line here, and we've in the U.S. have had many discussions about this. And what's the right bound? What's the right way to characterize this so that we say it's okay for espionage, but we are really not okay when it comes to critical infrastructure and disrupting critical infrastructure. And just to be clear, these are conversations that have been had many, many, many times over, and very deliberately, very thoughtful conversations, very, very thoughtful conversations at the most senior levels, maybe not this administration, but anyway, very thoughtful conversations about what's the right boundary and how do we control it, how do we ensure that we don't cross that boundaries ourselves, okay? I think part of this article suggests that there's no such discipline being exhibited by any of our adversaries, okay? What they're doing for espionage, they're also just as well starting to use it for disruptive activities as well. And that's what's the bigger concern, okay? But here's the thing that I think is really where we're trying to figure out, and we're still trying to figure out, is what's the right, because espionage is okay. I mean, it's not okay, but
what you mean.
It's saying it's okay within the context of government spying on other governments. But there is a norm of behavior of, hey, you can't go and disrupt critical infrastructure. And that norm is not widely accepted here. But that norm is also hard to differentiate when a piece of code that's used for espionage can also be used for disruption too.
Yeah, it definitely lowers the barrier to entry when there's a toehold already in there. Yeah, so I don't know. It is a somewhat of a watershed, but between that and the trade war and the tariff war, it's definitely escalatory. It doesn't look good in that regard.
How much I wasn't in infrastructure, so I'm not as familiar with it, but how much support does our government give to our utilities? How does that work? They're preparing them. And more importantly, as things start escalating potentially with our friends in China, what is the impact of some of the cuts that are happening in the government, especially around security? How is that going to impact infrastructure and the support that we have provided before or not? It seems like whatever support we provided to our infrastructure it's never going to be successful, right? Security is never 100% secure.
Yeah, no, but at least we tried, and the water infrastructure is one that we are somewhat concerned about, and things like the water ISAC is now basically unfunded. Thank you to the administration today. So it unfortunately they weren't able to get much of a they weren't able to get going. But they were trying to get going, and they got their legs pulled from underneath them. But that said, yeah, there were efforts to try to get more support for these other infrastructures, but it's hard. It's hard because these infrastructures are run by, of course, private sector or community groups or whatever else it is, and they're all small, and there's just no time and resources that are being allocated to this. You have companies that are like 5-10 people you're going to really dedicate somebody for security out of that group, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it has to do more with, like, you have some public sector critical infrastructure that's actually run by, may not be federal, but state or local. And then you have a lot of critical infrastructure that's run by private entities. So the former, you have some natural potential, at least, for groups like CISA to help out or advise because it is a government entity. And the latter, on the other hand, which is I think very interesting, in my experience at least, being in the private sector, supporting critical infrastructure and having that designation, there was very light touch. There was no what was it called? A request for technical assistance, an RTA form that if you just happened to feel like, attending the right meetings, you could hear about it and maybe get the Word doc. And it meant if things really went down and everything was under attack, you could fill out this form and see if you could get some help. And no one ever tested it, so that's not super compelling. And I remember bringing that form by legal, like, hey, by the way, can we pre-clear this? And everybody's like, whoa, government, what are you talking about? We did get it done so that we could send it out in advance if we needed to. But generally, there was very little, and there wasn't a lot of complaining about that because there was an executive order that designated critical infrastructure, right? And basically said, hey, these agencies are each in charge of the sector, and we want you to identify which companies in your sector are critical and get us the list, and then we'll contact them and what, right? And it was basically a letter saying, hear ye, you are critical infrastructure. And that was it. And I mean, for 15 to 20 years, there was never anything more to it. I know in our industry, which is financial services, the people who received that letter were, very forward-looking, had big budgets, and they already knew how to do government relations and lobbying and so much more. So they played the long game a lot. And when it came to that letter coming in, they said, I don't know what this means, but it could mean an overreach. It could mean someone running in here and telling us what we can and cannot do, and we don't want that. So let's proactively demonstrate we're taking that letter seriously. And everybody got together and formed this ARC, Analysis and Resiliency Center, to say, look, we're banding together, and we're going to have and there was a SCIF created to be able to get intelligence and whatnot. But that was totally of the volition of the members. And I think some of the members felt like, I don't know if this is giving me much value, but I do like the messaging here, and that I feel a little bit more comfortable that the government's not going to come dictating what we need to do, because at least we could show we've taken their letter seriously. But that's about it, Mario. I don't know if it comes to running other areas of critical infrastructure, if there is you can egress through our gateways and we will chase down bad actors and kill their TCP connections in real time during war.
You do. One of you guys has said this previously, that you see this thing from the government saying thou must do or shall do this. Sometimes the security team can use that information to go back to your executives and say, I got to go do this, and we're weak on this. We need to invest some money in it. Do we feel like that's being used as a tool?
No, it's so tough too, right? Because they'd have to grant money also, which then would create this system where companies are trying to get elevated to getting designated critical infrastructure, because then they get this grant for security. Yeah. And what perverse incentive is that when you're saying, hey, everybody, there's a benefit for you to be critical infrastructure? Then you have people like, God knows what it would cause. So like with our economic and political model, it's tough. How do you give more money to this company than that one because they're processing stuff that's designated as critical, or any money at all versus none? Well, do you think Oracle is on the list of critical infrastructure providers?
OCI, maybe. But here's an interesting perspective that is worth considering. So inside of an organization, or inside of a large financial institution, let's say, if I were to ask everyone, hey, is your application critical to the business? Okay. Most of people say, yes, it is. Okay. I mean, because that brings attention and maybe money and more resources. But it also brings forth additional responsibility, right? And a lot of people are like, hey, I want the money but not the responsibility. And I'm just describing what happens inside of an organization. So let's take that now to the critical infrastructures and say, okay, hey, bring out all your critical infrastructure. If you think you're critical, let us know, and here's money. But with this money, you have to do these things. And as long, I think, in my view, if they do those things, I think that's like a rising tide that lifts all boats. I'm okay for people to say self-declare, as long as they fulfill their responsibilities that come with that.
I'll tell you, like the way that it went down originally, right after that EO, I remember, and I think this is really cool. I think this is a good model. Is they didn't say, "Hey, everybody, if you think you're critical, raise your hand." Instead, they got together a much larger superset of entities in financial services in a room, and they said, "Let's map out financial interconnections." Right. So they had a set of they had from broker dealers and exchanges and clearinghouses and everyone in between. And they said, how do you move money? What's the network that you use? Who are your most common counterparties? Who do you think would be critical? And you can't say yourself, right? Like who, if they were down, would cause a problem. And if everybody in the room said, oh, yeah, Swift is a big deal, then they put the stamp on them. And I think that's pretty cool, right? It's almost like peer voting, vouching for criticality.
Yeah. At one time I had this horrible 3-letter words, BCP. Reporting underneath me. I hated it. I'm a security guy, not a BCP, disaster recovery kind of guy. Yeah. So before you do BCP, and everybody who listens to our shows, if you're going to do this whole business impact analysis, and you actually got to go meet with the teams. And yes, Sunil and Jerry are right. Everybody thinks their freaking job and their function is uber critical to the business. Okay, God bless you. Yes, it is. But with that comes heavy responsibility. And I used to always tell people, you don't want to be, in a critical 1 being critical, 3 not as critical, 4 not being as critical, or whatever the number we decided makes sense. I always used to caveat them, the more criticality you assign to your roles, the more oversight and controls we're going to look at or put in. There's a double-edged sword. So all I'm saying is just be careful with this kind of activities.
So I tried to slip Oracle in there, and the reason was they this breaking or evolving Oracle breach that we actually mentioned last time. Now it's escalating a little bit, and the purported breach of Oracle. Now Oracle has said, "Oh yeah, there is a breach, but it's in this legacy system. There's nothing going on in Oracle Cloud, and that's what everybody cares about." I don't know. To me, I can't help but to think about when we talked about notifications and transparency, and I still think that the problem here is probably that internally they don't really know what's going on. It's probably really hard for them to get ground truth. But I got to think there's a lot of big entities that are having some serious fire drills right now, trying to figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, I think if you're an OCI user, it's just good to know to have a reason to double check, right? But that said, I think my opinion actually on this one is that it's going to be a nothing burger, largely because, from what I understand, Oracle with these particular servers did the right thing in having the credentials hashed and probably salted as well. So the ability, it's like the LastPass breach from a while back. Yeah, that was pretty bad in terms of just losing all that information, but it was pretty well locked down, such that it would be hard for people to decrypt it at scale. So, will there potentially be some compromises as a result of this? I mean, it's going to take a lot of effort on the part of the attacker, and I think the attacker even said, "Hey, I haven't been able to decrypt anything yet." So, that at least says that Oracle is doing at least the right practices when it comes to.
Did the attacker set that they hadn't get any access, Sunil? The attacker set that.
Something along the lines of they haven't been able to decrypt any of the passwords.
Yeah, I don't think that'll save the day here. But I think if this is a nothing burger, I think it'll be because the switching cost off Oracle is so high, right? Because if you think about it, who's in Oracle and why did they choose them? That's because there was some big enterprise agreement with Oracle, and everybody in engineering was told one morning that they're on Oracle. Nobody said, well, nobody can bake it off against a public cloud service provider. So those companies aren't able to go oh, yeah, it's a little insecure. Let's move back to AWS like we were thinking before. Nah, that's not even those aren't the two that are the options for that company.
Everybody I've talked to that is a client of Oracle Cloud. And there's not many that I've spoken to
over there on the West Coast in San Francisco.
That would readily admit this. I don't think none of them go, oh, yes, I'm in Oracle Cloud. Amazing. What amazing technology. None of them go there because they want to, but rather because they're forced to, because of licensing.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. Yeah, that doesn't change. All right, here's a cool story. I'm reading the headline here for people not watching the YouTube feed. Hackers spied on 100 U.S. bank regulators' emails for over a year. This was the OCC, so is that Office of the Comptroller of the Currency? Am I correct on that?
Mm-hmm.
I think so. It is one of the cabal of regulators under the FFIEC, and therefore it is a banking regulator. And it's saying it was over a year that threat actors were in there and spying on emails among these. So it's interesting. A lot of people will paint this as, see, I told you that regulators don't know anything about security and they have no business asking us about security. We all know that the regulators and literal examiners had nothing to do with setting up their email infrastructure anyway or securing it. But I'll tell you, like, my take on this reminds me, one thing that we were able to do as a very large organization, and it took some doing and some politicking, but we were able to say during document production from regulatory examinations, we said this level of detail we're going to submit to you, to your, they had all kinds of ridiculous Rube Goldberg machines of virtual data rooms, and like, click here and the password will be emailed to you separately or whatever, and you send up the documents. And I felt like all that stuff was 100% owned. There's no way that stuff was secure. But the strictly sensitive data, and we defined it pretty clearly, we wouldn't submit. And we said, you have to look at it in person, and we would do it at a mutually agreeable location. We were lucky that we had offices everywhere that you could imagine, Chicago and DC and New York and overseas, anywhere we had nexus. And we would say, come to our offices, and in many cases we'd set up a computer and it would have the files on it and it would already be logged in, and they could spend all the time they want on it. And they could, print stuff out too. They could have paper copies of things. And it worked. Like, a lot of people thought, oh, you'll never get away with that. They'll never agree to it. But the argument we would start to make is, if you guys get breached, and it was not hard to find people at government regulators who would say, I totally agree. Yeah, I don't want that info either. If you're going to give me a way, I could look through it, and I'm not going to be pregnant with it because I know we're going to get breached too, and I don't want that to happen. So I still advocate for that. And here in maybe the banking regs, because I'm thinking more like SEC, CFTC, Bank of England, Monetary Authority of Singapore, et cetera. Maybe the FFIEC in particular, I don't remember trying that with them. Maybe that was a problem here. But is this humiliating? Is it a thematic?
So I think it depends on the scenario and the use cases of the nature of the interaction. So for those who aren't familiar with the OCC, and Jerry, you can fill in any holes if I'm missing something, but they're really trying to just understand the condition of the bank. How healthy is it? Will it be able to survive shocks and stresses and so on and so forth? And to be able to assess that, you need to be able to look at very sensitive information about the what the bank is currently involved in. Think of it like it's like HIPAA or it's like electronic health records for a bank, right? And I think what, Jerry, you're saying is, look, if you're just really trying to determine whether I'm healthy or not, I don't really want to send you my health records, okay? Why don't we just actually meet at the doctor's office and just go through the examination? They can show you all the details, and then I just take back the paper and stuff back with me, because I don't think you want to hold on to these, and we don't want you to hold on to these. But at the end of the day, all you need is yep, they're good, or nope, you're not, right? And so in that particular scenario, that makes a lot of sense, because if the final determination is, yes, this bank is healthy, it can survive this type of shock and stress test, that's all we need. But if it's like SEC reporting, it's like, well, we gotta send that somewhere before it gets disseminated and so on and so forth. So anyway, I think in your scenario, the example that you gave, I think it makes sense for it to be for us to continue, for the bank to continue to hold that content and just share it when needed, versus having it persistently held inside of a government regulator.
I like what Jerry said, though. It's interesting. It kind of reminds me of a philosophy I like to espouse for security leaders. At every company that I would join early on, whatever, they would invariably say, the IT person or the engineer, trust me, folks, this is crazy. Do you want admin rights or root rights as a security person? I'm like, no. I don't want any admin rights or elevated privilege, because then I become a target and something happens. Great, it's the freaking CISO got popped, and that was used as a conduit. That this elevated privilege, this access to more information that's critical or confidential. It's human nature to want to have that. Oh, I'm part of the club, the special club. But there comes something with that. It comes with something. It also, as a public company, the more access you have to a database, for example, that may hold financial information, then now you become one of those selected groups that cannot trade within a period. I mean, you already have that to begin with in a public company, but it gets even harder to trade, even in an open window, because you're one of those folks who can actually have access to information that could but take advantage of some information in public companies, and you can be rewarded. So I guess the long-winded message is, I think Jerry's right on. I like that. I don't want to see the information. I don't want to have access. And if I am going to look at it, I'll view it within the confines of this environment.
So let me pick the same scenario now, but let me apply it to something that we all know and love. Third-party risk management. Okay, so we have tools like SafeBase. Congrats to Al Yang and the acquisition by Drata. But here's the question. Are we now sending the equivalent of our electronic health records to all the companies who ask for them via SafeBase? Okay? And effectively, we are. We're saying, hey, you want to get, let's just be clear. TPRM, all they're trying to do is a thumbs up, a thumbs down, right? Do we do business with this company? Are we confident of their security, or are we not? Do they really need to retain all our security information to make that after the determination? No. In fact, I think they should purge it, right? But what is it that we typically do? We send in this massive spreadsheet, usually. Anyway, but you get the point, and you get everyone knows the drill here. And I do like SafeBase, and I like the tool, the ability to offload my answers to all these questions. But at the same time, I am propagating a lot of my electronic health records about the company to other people. And how confident am I that they're not going to get popped and they'll gather that information? And for anyone who's interested, you can go. OpenAI is a customer of SafeBase, so you can go to OpenAI, their trust center, pretend that you're going to do business with OpenAI, and get a lot of potentially sensitive details about OpenAI. How comfortable are we with that being propagated wherever you want?
I think, I mean, you bring up really good points, and I'll throw the kind of sardonic angle on it, though, is that the stuff that's shared in TPRM is kind of stupid and useless. And, it's kind of sad, but if you're the Dark Army, right, that's my generic hacker stand-in, and you want to get sensitive info, actually, this is really prescient, because one of the things that we used to do, and that I recommend to people now, is if you're worried about state-level threat actors and sabotage and that, and it's a big F, so first of all, you probably aren't, and don't worry about this. Earmuffs everybody else. But if you are, a really cool hack is to mine search queries against your internal documents and your Confluence and all that. And if somebody suddenly pops in from a new temp that's working there, and they're searching for passwords and keys and architecture and that sort of thing, then you pay attention to it, you put eyes on it, and we busted red teamers all the time like that. And until we did that, we weren't. That was awesome. So if you do that and you monitor, in a retrospect after big breaches where that was a part of the kill chain, if you say, what did they search for? Then you're going to know what is a useful document and what's real. And I'm just going to venture to guess that nobody is searching for SOC 2. Nobody's taking the SOC 2 report and saying, all right, now I know how to take down this water plant. Unfortunately, that's the state of affair. Or the SIG, right? Or any of these questionnaires. Oh, come on. Or my favorite is the ISMS, right? The Information Security Management System document. Everyone has the same one. They just download it and control and replace everything.
What? Okay, but I will search for a pen test.
Yeah. Yep. Right. especially
Yeah,
if it's a good one. Yeah, pen test, bug bounty findings, stuff like that. Assuming that they're not fixed yet.
What about pen test? I want that in a heartbeat, right? I want and the more quality, obviously, the more quality, not those anywhere. And don't get me started on that. What do you guys think about? I don't know if it's even useful anymore. What about network diagrams, or more like not network diagram? Are they useful?
The point here is, if we as a security shop are needing to provide this to our buyer, customer, we're repeating what I think Jerry was trying to avoid with the OCC, okay? And can we get to a point where we all just generally agree? Look, trust me, I don't want anybody else's third-party stuff either, right? Why do I care? Just beyond the basic decision, why do I want to be a source of a potential hazard for other organizations? And so again, whether it's network diagrams or not passwords, but pen tests or even stupid SOC 2, the point is that can we come up with a different way of doing this, because we're just throwing all this sensitive content out to the wind and hoping that everyone's going to properly secure it.
Yeah. Hey, for what it's worth, I remember the SEC many years ago now, probably over 10 years ago now, they had an examiner go to Black Hat and lose a laptop. And they disclosed it, credit to them, because, and this is really interesting, they ran their internal incident response, and like all of us, your laptop is reported gone. What do? Can you confirm IT that the hard drive was encrypted? Yeah, okay, cool, we'll go back to bed. That was just it. Like, no matter what, you weren't really worried. But if it was encrypted, at least you had some defensibility to why you were going back to bed. And they did that, and the guy's like, no, it wasn't encrypted. The hard drive wasn't encrypted. And then they asked what was on the hard drive, and I obviously didn't image it, I bet, or back it up, who knows. But they got a pretty good idea what it was, and they started notifying all the regulated entities. It was an examiner. And we were in that. And I remember getting a letter from the CISO of the SEC at the time, and it said, this thing happened and all of that. And it was, and I remember the examiner, because, he had a lot of pointed questions during the exams, of course. So this is a pattern, and these kinds of things are going to happen again. It's tough to secure any org, but imagine a public sector org with high turnover and a lot of competition for talent and limited budget all the time. Really hard.
And let me also just throw one additional thing into the mix here. So, Jerry, you were mentioning who cares about a SOC 2? Who cares about some of these things that we're sending to other parties? The bigger point here is that we now have these tools that allow us to scour through all that very quickly. The ability for an attacker to mine that content has now greatly accelerated. Yeah. And if our employees are being armed with that, certainly our attackers can be armed with that as well. And so whether it's the SOC 2 or what, it doesn't matter what it is, but the point is that now a lot of that is very accessible, very discoverable through these AI assistants that we have. And what we thought would have been harder to find or just more obscure becomes much more, it's brought to the surface much faster.
Yeah. Information hoarding is dangerous for security, folks. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, guys. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for another great episode, as always. I look forward to seeing you guys in San Francisco pretty soon for RSA. And I hope you have a great fortnight.